tariffs. Few people in the supply chain world have seen anything like this in their lifetime.
A lot of it is breaking something, at least in your head, before it's actually broken.
So fix it!
That is not your typical business-to-business podcast for sure. It's the Briefings Podcast from the big executive search and leadership advisory firm, Korn Ferry.
It's another vehicle to show off the thought leadership of our company. One of the other goals was to take on topics that might be difficult in an article, but visually you could make interesting.
In this episode of Everything Thought Leadership, you'll hear my interview with Jonathan Dahl, Vice President and Chief Content Officer at Korn Ferry. He's the driver behind the year-old podcast series, and without a doubt, it's been a success. In our discussion, you'll learn about the strategy behind the podcast, the cost, which will surprise you because it's not a lot, and the key lessons learned. So, Jonathan, this is round 2 on Everything Thought Leadership. We did an overview of your role in thought leadership at Korn Ferry in the previous one. Now we're going to focus on the Briefings Podcast, which to me is a really innovative podcast. I haven't seen anybody doing the techniques that you folks are doing. And I think this is a great opportunity to talk about things such as why you started a podcast and why you apparently believed it had to be different than very different than most other podcasts out there. First, where did the idea to do a regular podcast come from?
I listen to a lot of podcasts, particularly around history. And there's this neat one, American History Tellers. And it always starts with the scene from history. It was 1993, blah, blah, blah. And I thought that, here they took a subject that was kind of dry history and found a way to make it interesting. And I'm kind of always looking for ways to do that with corporate content. That's why I have a daily website playing stuff off the news. Why I have a national magazine to show it. And I wanted to try it on podcast. I must say it was many years in the making. It was not an easy sell in the beginning. It was like, oh, here's another one of his crazy ideas. The way I managed to do it was I finally kind of found some people that could do it and scrimped up a little funds to put together to show Jill Wilfong, who's the host, what it would look like. And she, maybe 20 seconds into it, said, oh, we got to do this. So if you can find some way to create whatever you want to do that's innovative, it goes a longer way to getting it done.
But let me ask you, because a lot of the people watching this, I think, don't have a podcast. They're trying to convince somebody higher up in the company that we should do a podcast and do it well. What were the major obstacles or kind of pushback you got? And then how did you answer that?
Well, the first was funding. When we had tried podcasts in most places, it was like $30,000 a podcast. When we went to outside firms, I assume that was many years ago. It's come down, but the price point was pricey. That was the first issue. And then the second issue, of course, is why would we need it? How is this going to enhance our business? And my selling point was that, well, we do webinars and stuff like that, but we're not really, we're getting some audience for it, but it's not like blowing up. And this might be an attempt to it. From the start, I was focusing on YouTube, not Apple. I think we were way ahead of the game. Turns out YouTube has surpassed Apple, and Spotify is the #1 podcast channel. And that's because it's visual.
So the importance there is YouTube is, it's a video podcast. And yeah, you can derive an audio version from it, but Apple, Spotify, others, they're all audio podcasts.
Right from the start, the idea was to show scenes, create skits, show people. We pull in movie clips, add a visual element, make it more interesting. It's the same thing I would say with other thought leadership content. There's a lot of stock content that a lot of companies use that's just, showing somebody working on that, and it just isn't very interesting. We try to do provocative art both in the magazine and online, and it was the same concept.
So what were the initial goals? So you got to go ahead, and what did you say? Here are our goals for the next X number of years.
Well, obviously try to create a large audience try to it's another vehicle to show off the thought leadership of our company. So we will always you maybe one outsider, but always one insider from the company to show how smart they were. And then hopefully that would get attention, not just necessarily for the podcast and the views, but also in the greater sphere, the media, whatever. It's another vehicle to try to sell it. So we do a real indirect sell, my team in thought leadership, where it's not saying, well, this is what we have, that's great. It's implying that if you went with us, we would know these things. And, one of the other goals was to take on topics that might be difficult in an article, but visually you could make interesting. So frenzy to find work, you can do a skit about somebody really trying to do it. We just did a recent one, AI agents. You hear that word. Well, what does that mean? Well, we actually interviewed an AI agent, which is a computerized robot. And that really gets the point across. And it wouldn't in audio and it wouldn't in print. So it's more about, taking topics that lend themselves to something that's visual.
Did you look at any other video podcasts, especially before you launched this, to say, I like a piece of this, I like this part of that? I mean, did you look at any as kind of role models?
Well, I like your podcast. I think you ask provocative questions and don't waste time with kind of the fluff question, and you edit it down. So I did pick up quite a bit from how you handle the Q&A part. Our podcast is divided into different parts, but in the Q&A part, I liked that. I didn't really use many from others because I thought they were pretty dry.
How did you get Jill Wiltblanc to host the podcast? Was that an easy sell? Because I know she had TV news experience in her background.
It was a little difficult in the beginning. It's kind of like, well, maybe we should be shining somebody else at the company or whatever. But I convinced her that I'd seen her TV anchoring skills, so I knew she'd be very sharp right from the start. And I thought that was very important, that if we're going to do this, then we need somebody right away that is very good. The second half of it was not co-hosted, but we have a freelancer I hired, Rupak Bhattacharya, who is from the Hollywood world. He's both an actor and a scriptwriter. And to me, he's extremely colorful. He didn't have any business background, business reporting, business content. Somebody from my network recommended him, said he might be good, and he's turned out to be really brilliant. The third component is one of our producers, Jaron Henry McCrae, who does the visuals that are just, has the little pop exploding things that come on. We did one snap decisions, and we did a skit. How much time do you need to make a snap decision? He had the little hands going like this, snapping it down from 10 seconds. He's always, and we never tell him what to do. We just let him ride with it.
So how many people are involved in producing a podcast? And yours typically run 12 to 15 minutes?
Yeah, that was one of my goals, is that they're just, most podcasts I see or listen to are too long. So I was going to say, let's keep it at 15 to 16 minutes. It's a very small team. It's me, Rupak, Jaron, Jill. Then there's a very strong marketing team that helps promote it. But our team is pretty small.
But it's not costing $30,000 an episode, right? Which was been quoted before.
It's a fraction of that, and that was a big selling point.
Okay, let's run one of these.
This is Briefings, our deep dive into topics that corporate leaders need to care about.
You listen to me and you listen well.
Okay.
Really?
Retainer.
Do you think AI agents like you will completely replace all human workers one day soon?
I think there are certainly areas where AI can be very helpful.
What's the best?
So that was your robot, right?
Yeah, that's an actual AI agent.
Not a real person.
Not a real person, but it looked like one. And some people who saw it said, I thought it really was a real person, which was really, really neat. One of the tricks that's worked for us is to switch this up, for example, with our guests, not just have the academic expert who can be very good, For example, when we did one on Gen Z, we had a Gen Z person on and asked them, well, is it fair what people are saying about you? And that was really done well. And here, what you're seeing is we do a social clip that we run on social as a way to, kind of like what you do, advanced clip of what's going to come out.
Okay, so let's.
Best approach to guiding a team.
I think the best leaders are anchoring people in purpose.
Here's a quick look at what else is happening in business. Remote jobs are much more likely to go to workers earning above $250,000 per year.
Appreciate you being here today.
So what I'm seeing here seems to be important is you have to summarize what's in the rest of the 12, 13, 14 minutes, right? I see a lot of podcasts where there's no upfront, discussion of here's what you're going to learn. Here's what we're going to tell you. So this may be totally obvious, but why is that so important?
Well, you're not going to get people to invest the time unless they know what's coming. You obviously can kind of tease them. We, as you saw, that we do movie clips. And so it's kind of like, oh, well, how am I going to see Brad Pitt? Why is Brad Pitt in there? Maybe I'll watch it for 8 minutes just to see how they bring in Brad Pitt. How do they tie him to leadership? And actually, it's very easy to do that with these clips. But what I found frustrating with others was that there's just this assumption. One of the problems I find in thought leadership, corporate thought leadership, is there's the assumption that you're going to pay attention to them, that they tell you, here's the topic, and you're going to pay attention to that. Well, you may not be interested in it at the moment. That's why we do a lot of timely subjects, both for the podcast and online, because we're trying to get you that, oh, I'm paying attention to tariffs, so here's something on tariffs. Where there's a lot of ones where the podcasts are about subjects that might have been interesting a year ago, but I don't know why I'm watching it now.
Yeah. One theory I have as to why a lot of podcasts don't do that summary, which is the producers have put so much time into scripting something and they think, well, they ought to watch it because we've invested so much time in it. So they will just drink it up. And of course, it doesn't work that way.
No, and it starts with a headline, right? We had Jolt of Uncertainty to talk about the tariffs. We had Fire Your Boss to talk about the period when bosses were becoming, where CEOs and bosses started getting to be more kind of take command of their work staff. The new unemployables. Who's not going to click that? Find out what that is. So the headlines we spend a lot of time on, as we do throughout our content, but particularly with a podcast, to get people to invest in it or to think about investing.
All right, let's keep going a little bit.
You're going to get all of our resumes now.
I mean, who has a blooper in their podcast? We do. Jill is a great sport to allow us because she's typically the blooper. But it's just another thing to watch at the end. It's like, oh, well, maybe I'll stay for the end just to watch that. I think that's unique. Inside that clip you saw was also This Week in Leadership. So we played with this. We did it. It's a 6-minute clip about what's in the news this week. And we first put it in the beginning, and we put it in the middle. We had it at the end. Now we have it in the middle. It's kind of a break. So here's the first segment. We're going to interview someone. Now we're going to do a kind of a newscast. Then we bring you back to it. And then we end with a blooper. Bill was very big about how we would describe in one clip what it's about. What she says is topics that leaders need to care about. I think we had something that was a little dry for the first 10 episodes. It was, the voice of leadership. Who cares? So she was very good at getting us to focus it down. The other thing you might notice is that the visuals, even the background, kind of interesting. It moves across the clips, the voice clips that come out. So if you weren't paying attention, here's some of the key words. A lot of podcasts I see forget to keep putting up the name of the person you're watching. And of course, you forget who it is. And that's a common misstep that I see that we tried to correct here.
I think this is excellent. Let's move to the second one, which is the skits.
Sure.
This gentleman here, Rupak,
Sure, Korn Ferry Briefings Podcast may be the premier B2B podcast on the planet, but it's not business as usual. Welcome to the Friday night office party, coming to you live from the bar.
I don't think you earn enough.
Now wait a minute, how do you know how much I make?
But you didn't get the memo?
I assume you've seen the headlines.
Access granted.
Oh gosh, that sounds terrible.
Is that your book on private equity?
Great. Now I'm stuck in an elevator.
I think you'll find that I'm superior to my human counterpart in many ways.
Could stop it there. What we're trying to do at the beginning of the podcast, we don't do it all the time, but typically YouTube has a collection. It's like 30 seconds of what the podcast is about. But then what we do is we go to a skit when we have one. And what I'm trying to do is kind of, again, let you know what it's about and have kind of fun with it. And he's just a great actor, and he comes up with really ingenious ways of doing it. Here's about, like, do leaders need a special superpower? And he does his thing with it. And he'll show scenes, workplace, like if you're negotiating for salary, he'll show somebody doing it all the wrong way possible to let you know, well, we're going to tell you a little bit more how to do it. If we're going to show, how bosses have gotten meaner and meaner, he's going to show this boss getting bigger and bigger as a way to, it's just a lot of fun.
So we know from the success of shows like The Office that office politics, those kind of things done well, especially done with comedy, can command an audience, right? Look at the popularity of Michael Scott and his crew in The Office.
People will say, well, what does this have to do with our business? Are you making us look silly? There is a risk there. And the response to that is, well, first of all, look at the format. We're putting this on YouTube, we're putting it on Instagram. It's not on our homepage. So it's for a particular audience. It's basically to get our name out there the same way we're on the Korn Ferry tour, the PGA tour we're on, called the Korn Ferry tour. So it's just another way of getting our name out there, name recognition, and maybe attract some of this audience to think about Korn Ferry.
And do you think some of the audience you're attracting is a younger audience, meaning younger than me? I'm 70 in June. My era of marketing was the button-down, corporate, boring, no podcasts, that kind of boring white paper. Now you've got younger people who've grown up on MTV and even later than that, and they can't sit still for a 5,000-word white paper. Many of them won't read it.
Well, a key thing I've learned since coming to Korn Ferry is there are different segments of audience. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, you were just talking to 100 million people, and you got to try to grab as many as you can. But here in business, it's about identifying segments who will spend money on you or have a big important role at your company. So our platforms that I do talk to different segments. So This Week in Leadership is going to be kind of a higher level, trying to talk to people. We do one called Briefings for Boardroom. This is kind of, you're right, is kind of more the Gen Z. And that's an important audience to get. I think it's one of the biggest problems today in the business world is not understanding, not trying to learn from this group. They make, when you really think about it, they make a lot of good points. Like there's talk about like, well, they don't pay attention in interviews. Well, that's because the interview questions are pretty stupid. And well, why would they answer that? Why would they pay attention to that? We're beginning to see more than 50% is the gig workforce. They were the ones that started that. Why invest your whole life in one place? So, and then the fold.
Plus, some of these Gen Zers are starting companies in Silicon Valley or other places where venture capital is flowing, and they're the CEO. They're the leadership team, right?
Millennials have already taken over, of course. They represent more than 50% of the workforce. And then Gen Z is just going to be coming up. But there's a real problem there. That's an important audience that is not as engaged in the corporate world. We had a study about how a large percentage never even talked to somebody over 50, and somebody over 50 has never talked to a Gen Z. I mean, that's a real problem. There's always been a generation gap, but this is a bigger one.
Yeah. Okay.
Recruiter Man is here.
Of course we're up to code. Do you even know which code I'm referring to?
I think we may have a flag on the play. Let's look at the replay. Pizza! That is just shocking. Korn Ferry Briefings Podcast.
Now, that's one of my favorite skits. We did one about office parties. Is there a place for them? Are they needed? And, this is a clever way. He plays a sportscaster and he reviews, who's there, who's not, and what food are they serving. And I still love his pizza line.
I love it. I love it. So let's talk about the reaction you've gotten in the marketplace. How do you get, what kind of feedback have you gotten? How is it coming in? And has that feedback resulted in making adjustments from the very first?
Yeah, we're coming up to the golden 50th one. We've definitely learned a lot along the way. We had to play with the length of the skit, play with how long we would talk to people or how long we would have clips. We had to discover what topics kind of resonated a little bit more. I will say that we've been surprised. Topics that we thought would do better. If you're doing something on how to increase your pay, negotiate your salary, or fire your boss, you naturally are going to get that. But we've done stuff like, the brain back to work, and just about how there was a study over 40 years and our brain capacity is down to 40 seconds when it used to be 3 minutes. There's a readership for that kind of, if you can bring them in, they're actually going to stay and listen to it. But we have to be clever about how we do it. It's taken off. We've more than doubled the audience since we start. I think we've tripled our subscribers. Also, just within the company, it's just a lot of people really like it. Our CEO, we said a lot of nice words about it. Jill really likes it. It's a fun thing, and it seems to have done very well on social.
And do the consultants at Korn Ferry and, the recruiters and leadership development folks, do they come to you and say, I was with so-and-so, CEO or VP of marketing or whatever, and she really likes this?
Since we're a client-oriented business along with search, it gives the opportunity of a partner coming to us trying to improve a connection with a client. And so you can suggest a client to come on. We did one on private equity, which, by the way, did really well. You'd never think it would.
Oh.
And that was the idea, bring someone in from that side. So it helps for help business that way, which is the same thing we do for the magazine and Twill, whatever, bring in clients, put them in. It's a little more difficult. They've got to be ready to play ball and enjoy what we're doing. And a lot of companies look at this and go, no, it's not us. And that's fine.
Yeah, I guess that's fine. But, I just think writing about business as a business journalist back in the early 80s and moving over to thought leadership in 1987 and staying in thought leadership ever since, I've always thought business communications, business marketing is way too stuffy. It's way too buttoned down. It's way too stilted. It's way too boring, and that carries over to a lot of thought leadership as well. But something like this, where I think it pokes at humor in the workplace to introduce people to important ideas and trends and the advice that Korn Ferry consultants give. I think you can't spoon feed the audiences today the way we would spoon feed them 30 years ago, much less 10 years ago.
Well, my dad did public relations for IBM, actually internal public relations. So I grew up kind of in that stilted world. It had 8 white shirts and the hat all lined up and the suit. And the work world has definitely relaxed, and with it, content needs to relax with it. I do understand, it depends on the business. We're a business, we're an advisory and search business. And it's a little easier when you're kind of in the advisory role to kind of poke fun at what's happening in business, because when you're poking fun of it, you're showing a problem, and it may be a problem that they didn't realize they had, and you're telling them. And humor may be more effective way of saying, you're doing something wrong, whereas just saying, you're doing something wrong. So it's kind of getting at them and getting their attention, but not kind of insulting them, and doing it in kind of a colorful way.
We also know, especially during recessionary times, which we may be in right now, during the ups and downs of the economy, there's a lot of fear and other concern in large companies, mid-size, all companies, right? Which gets to the kind of survival instinct. Will I lose my job? Right? Or will I get the pay increase that I feel I deserve? Well, the company's, laying off people. I can't now ask for the raise. And so working in companies during really difficult times can be difficult, especially for people, young people in the workforce right out of college. They go from the great scene of college to the, I don't know what you want to call the scene of business, where everything is serious and you can't say anything that might get you in trouble or may, get you fired. For a firm like Korn Ferry to make the workforce more human through a podcast like this, to me, is refreshing.
Well, that also fits with our larger branding. Our slogan is "Be More Than." We're trying to show the people side of things, which we work on, which is what we're doing here as well. That does include leadership. Leadership are people as well. One of our segments was on I Forgot, and it was talking about kind of older workers coming back into the workforce, but they and even younger workers under stress having memory problems. And that's a human problem that you shouldn't be afraid to talk about. And also another key thing that's happened is what is expected of the corporate world. Mental health, physical health wasn't really a part of IBM and the companies my dad worked for and GE, decades ago. But now it is, and it's expected to be, and particularly if you want Gen Z and the younger workforce involved. And so you have to show through your thought leadership that you're thinking about these things. You're noticing problems that are happening to the workforce. You're noticing that, bosses are really clamping down and wanting people back to the office. And it doesn't mean you're taking the workers' side, but you are explaining what's happening so they can, better understand it. Whereas in the past, they would just say, come to work, and that would be, you just have to do it. So it's trying to explain, you never used to have to explain anything. You would just tell people what to do. But now that world has changed. So I think that's a little bit of what's reflected here.
Yeah, and it's much healthier. There are a lot of discussable issues now that were not discussable when you and I entered the workforce, right? Big companies wouldn't even ask your boss about certain things.
No, we have a very funny piece this week on politics, the fact that everyone talks about it, but you're not supposed to talk about it, but everyone is. So what do you do about that? Instead of just like the old corporate response was, well, you can't talk about politics. Well, you know what? You're on a phone with a client and that client is talking politics. And if all we say is just don't talk about it, well, that actually can upset the client more than saying something. And the same thing with talking with colleagues. It's like, this was something that was just verboten even 5 years ago, but it's creeping up, and we have to help workers know how to handle that.
Yeah. So do you think the podcasts have helped Korn Ferry attract people to come to work for Korn Ferry, to show, we're kind of a fun place to work. We can discuss things in this company. We have a sense of humor, this and that perhaps some of your competitors may not have that image.
You're a very good salesman for our podcast. I'd noticed when, obviously, I talk to a lot of new people who come to the company because we're going to interview them and talk to them. And it's one of the first things they bring up. They saw the podcast, they really like it. Definitely helps that way. It doesn't mean that it's always a home run. You'll definitely have some kind of button down people in the company, and they're doing kind of a button down business. It's not because there's anything wrong with them. Look at this thing, and they don't want to be a part of it for that reason. It's not universal, but I think it does give that message that we're not afraid to make fun of ourselves.
So what do you think are the biggest lessons you've learned that other B2B companies can take from your this very innovative podcast?
Doesn't have to be as expensive as you think it does. You have to take risks. Got to bring in people that may not know anything about business, but can do visuals for you. You need really sharp, fun, buzzworthy headlines. You need to take subjects. You can't just keep doing the same subject, how to get a job, how to improve your career. You need to understand that like people are smart and want to be engaged in difficult topics that they might not get someplace else.
And Jill, as moderator, right? I mean, she's had years of being very comfortable behind a camera, being on TV. Who you choose as a moderator, I think, has got to be very important.
Yeah, and the same thing with Rupak Bhattacharya again, who was very, very comfortable with it. I will say another lesson we've learned is the guest, who you bring on. We do a pre-interview, and you got to have the guts, even with a partner, interview them and go, no, they're not going to work. You don't say it to their face, but just hopefully not get back and they're not upset with you. But to put them on isn't doing them a favor if they're just going to be, people, rightly so, can be very nervous. The world we're putting them in, they're talking from home and things are happening and their phone's ringing and they're not comfortable with it. And you shouldn't put them in that position.
Can people get better either through media training or, whatever, practicing? You say, look, practice this and then come back to us in 6 months. Is it possible to get somebody to be more?
Certainly, there are people at our company that have really become media savvy. Alan Garino, who has almost regular posts on CNBC, is just brilliant on TV. I don't think he started out that way. You can teach yourself how to do it. I used to go on the Today Show. We had a regular segment. I was just god awful. Actually, I could say I don't really think I learned anything. I was god awful at the end too. But I think there is something you can learn and we can point out to people. But that's an uncomfortable position to put someone in. If they come to us and say, well, what can we do to make it better? We'll definitely offer it to them. But I'm not going to usually tell a partner who's bringing in $3 million a year, or, oh, by the way, you're terrible at podcasts.
No, it might not be a good career move. So any other new podcasts now in the works, given your success with this one?
Oh, yeah. We started an internal podcast called Catch Up with a K, with the same team, but now also the public relations team. And instead of putting out a boring newsletter once a month saying, well, this is the accomplishments, this is what we did, we have a very, very colorful segments where we, find an employee. Like there was one employee who was auctioneering. And so we showed her as an auctioneer, and then we explain the business that she does. We bring in company leaders. We do quizzes with them. So they we humanize just about everybody at the company. And then we explain the business. I mean, Korn Ferry, like a lot of companies, it's hard to figure out right away. What is the advisory? What is the search? What does it mean to have a real estate practice? So we have somebody coming on and explain it. But that podcast is only 5 minutes. Because that's a tough audience when when people see something from internal public relations. It's only kind of human nature to kind of turn it off. My poor dad had to live with that forever. So we're having a lot of fun with that. I do see opportunities. We have really expanded our content. Hired a great Wall Street Journal reporter for board practice and CEO issues. We had a big cover called CEO Breaking Points, the things there are many different issues. And I think
Who's that reporter? Who's the reporter?
Alyssa Abakowitz. Fantastic. Worked for me before at KF Advance and at the Journal. And so we've gone out, and I've thought we could humanize directors. Whenever I talk to them or to the CEO, they're far more colorful once you get them in the right scenario than anybody realizes, and their knowledge base is just mind-boggling. But that's kind of a hidden world, and I'm looking for a way to bring it out the same way we brought out our partners.
Any thoughts on a longer podcast? like an hour or 2 hours. Where I'm coming from on this is I don't know if you've seen the podcast Acquired. From what I've read in your old Wall Street Journal article about them several months ago, they will spend a month doing the research. It's a monthly podcast. They will spend a month behind doing the research that leads to, the 2 hour long podcast.
So we tried a few like mini documentaries, and unless you can put the money behind it, just doesn't, to me, it's not effective. I mean, one of the compliments we get about our podcast is how well it's produced, but that's because we've kept it short and we've brought in these different segments. When you start doing kind of like a mini doc, now you got to have camera people outside, got to do much more with it. But we will keep trying because in the same way podcast used to be 30,000 an episode, the mini doc world has shrunk down in cost and effort as well. The other issue would be how much would we gain from that? I don't know how well. It would be lovely to take one of our briefings covers and really dive into it. How much that would engage an audience and get us name recognition, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Although when I look at the numbers, the downloads or the viewership of Acquired, what is it, 500,000 subscribers or whatever it is, I think, wow, they must be doing something right. And what is it that they do? How are they able to keep an audience for 2 hours?
Oh, well, I don't see a problem in keeping an audience. I mean, I think we can just be fascinating in the articles that we write. We had a piece called Mortal Leadership. It's on death. It was about how Western society's inability to accept and deal with death is one of the reasons why people don't switch jobs when they need to, is one of the reasons why they don't retire when they need to. And, very humanizing stories of people facing difficult times and how that all related. I wouldn't have a problem getting people engaged that long. But again, I think it's like to do that would require a much bigger operation. And then I don't know, in other words, if you have 50 podcasts, that's 50 times you're getting people involved. If you have 1 2-hour ones, that's just the one time. Maybe, as you're saying, with your numbers, that one time is memorable enough that it's equally as effective as 50 podcasts.
Jonathan, anything more about the Briefings Podcast and where it's going?
The last thing I'd say is just it's fun. It's really important that what you're doing and the team that's doing it really enjoys it. That's what makes people innovative. Because we were fun. We did the Briefings Podcast road trip. It was our best audience size ever. We did one that would look like Hollywood squares. I think that kind of comes from the fact that it's just fun. I look forward to the calls about it. I'm not dreading it. And as long as it stays fun, your team will be very innovative. I think when it comes to thought leadership, innovation is just critical.
Absolutely. This is great stuff. And I hope a lot of people watch this podcast and revise podcasts they have or use these principles in the new podcasts that they launch.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much for your time, Jonathan.
Sure.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left a like and if you shared the episode with your colleagues. Everything Thought Leadership is a video and podcast series from Buday TLP. It's for thought leaders and thought leadership professionals, the people who help experts get recognized as thought leaders. You can find out more about Buday Thought Leadership Partners at budaytlp.com.